Hey everybody, it's Patrick Moore with Ironclad Wealth Management here. And today our video is going to go over how you can save $80,000 on your taxes before April. And furthermore, we're going to do a little bit of fun stuff, and I'm actually going to show you the tools that I use to compare and contrast these different options for myself, for my clients, and actually show you some of the planning tools that are used, that even some, it's kind of how I do it. Maybe some other planners do it that way as well. So my goal is to really show you a little behind the scenes look at how you can save a substantial amount of money on your taxes. Now, I will say before we really get rolling, I have two big disclosures I'd like to give you. And the first is that our firm really focuses on working with business owners and professional service owners with 10 or fewer employees. So if you are not a business owner, this could be really good information for you to know in the future if you do start one, but this is really honed in on advice that's going to benefit business owners. Now, having said that, the presentation today is going to go over a completely legal tax strategy that's going to help you save taxes if you decide to implement it on 2022, even though we're already in 2023. However, this is general educational information, okay? Everybody's going to have their own different, situations, their own different little, kinks in there that may change this. So always make sure to take this educational information, either talk to your accountant, kind of do some thorough research on yourself and look into those pros and cons, or talk to your advisor before you implement something like this. Now, something I preach to a fault, probably with my clients, is that the best form of tax planning is proactive tax planning. And what I mean by that is that it's going to be better for you to start in January of the year that taxes are due. So January 2022 is better for 2022 taxes than January 23. But sometimes we put our heads up and we're like, oh crap, I owe a lot of taxes. And we kind of go into that scramble at the end of the year. And something that happens, I think, is that leads to some risks. You hear that idea that your friend did that sounds a little bit too good to be true, right? So what I wanted to do was talk about the single largest strategy that's out there. In my opinion, there might be a couple others out there that can help you save on taxes before April. Now, today what we're going to do is we are going to use an example. The clients are Joe and Josephine Sample. The strategy itself could be, a male, female, does not matter. Really, the two things that matter are how much you make and how old you are. So it's Joe and Josephine. They may have kids. It really won't make a huge difference on the taxes. But let's say they're 45. They run their own business. I've got law firm in here. Could be any type of business. But they don't have any employees. And that's really just to simplify things. So they may have 1099s. That's okay. But really, the nuts and bolts of it are that they're making $500,000 a year. And I'm going to show you how they can save $80,000 in taxes. Now, if you earn $300,000, obviously those numbers go down a little bit. If you earn more than $500,000, if you think about yourself individually, it might be more. So, without further ado, let's look at how these numbers came about. So, first things first, this is what their taxes would look like with no planning. $500,000, LLC owners, $500,000 in income in the state of Georgia. I'm from Atlanta, so if you're in California, your numbers may be a little bit higher. If you're in Tennessee or Florida, the numbers may be a little bit lower. Now, that $168,000 number comprises of FICA taxes, aka self-employment taxes in this example, federal income taxes, and state taxes. And at the end of the day, they have $330,000 left. So let's flip over and I'll show you my first little kind of behind the scenes tool, okay? And this is my tax planning software. This is the software that I use to come to these numbers. So you can see I plugged $500,000 in there. They've got their self-employment tax deduction in there. They have no QBI deduction because they're over the phase out and don't have any employees. And you can see now there's the tax number plus their state taxes down here. That's what comes to that 168 number. So when we compare these options in just a moment, that's where this is coming from. So when you're talking about making these decisions for yourself, I do think you either need to rely on a professional to do that, or you do need to have some sort of plan or tool that can really, fill in all the fields properly as you look at the taxes. So that's if they don't do anything, right? So how can you save these taxes now? Well, this may be a little bit of an interest to you, right? But the single largest deduction that's available is what's called the retirement plan deduction, okay? That can take many different forms, many different types of plans, but the best part about this is that it's available after the end of the year. So what type of plan are we going to talk about today? Well, you may have heard of IRAs. You've probably heard of 401ks, SEP IRAs, whatever that may be. But today we're going to talk about cash balance plans and how they work. So when we're talking about why we're talking about cash balance plans, it's very, very simple. Okay, you're going to see very quickly why we're talking about cash balance plans. So if you're Joe Sample, the following plans have these limits in 2022. An IRA at $6,000, a SEP IRA at $61,000, a 401k at $61,000, and a combined 401k and cash balance plan at $199,000. Now, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Why would you choose a cash balance plan? Well, probably because it gives you 3 times as much in the way of tax deductions as the other plans. So how are these calculated? Well, there's actually 2 main ways that these benefits are calculated, because it's based on your age and it's based on your income. The higher your income is, the more you can contribute. Now, it's actually the same way too on age. The higher your age is, the higher you can contribute, because you have less years left till retirement. So if Joe Sample was 55, they'd be able to contribute more. If they made $600,000, they may be able to contribute more. Now that income one does have a cap on it, so that can kind of complicate things a little bit, but that's the general way that it's done. The final note is that your corporate structure also will have an effect. If you're a C Corp or S Corp, the amount you can contribute will be based off your W-2, but we're doing an LLC example, so this is going to be one where really kind of all your compensation falls in one bucket. So it's a little bit different, but that's another thing to kind of keep a note on, is your business and corporate structure. So, okay, Patrick, the cash balance plan gives me 3 times in the ways of deductions. That's great. What's the catch? Okay. Well, the pros of the plan are that you have very high tax savings, and you also have creditor protection, which may not matter to everyone who's watching this, but if you're in a fairly litigious business or profession, could be beneficial. Now, the cons are a little bit different, right? And it's really just things that you have to take in mind and keep in mind when you're considering a cash balance plan. And probably the most important one is that you need to be able to commit to multiple years of funding if you want to implement this. Cash balance plans are technically a type of pension plan, and you need a commitment of at least 3 to 5 years. And what that means is, to you personally, is you need to think about, okay, is my business profitable? Obviously. But more importantly, is the cash flow consistent? You know, am I used to peaks and valleys? If you are, it may not make sense. The other thing to note is that it's a little less flexible than a 401k. You're not actually investing all the money in stocks. Typically, you invest in like a 4 to 6% rate of return. You try and, dial that in with the investments. The other note is that there are some administrative costs. You have to hire an actuary to do this. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a little bit, but it's typically a couple $1,000s. And when you compare $2,000 or $3,000 versus $168,000 in tax deductions, the math tends to lean in its favor. Now, the final note is that I mentioned earlier, we have no employees in this example. If you have employees, it may get a little bit more complicated, and it might still make sense, but you do have to include employees like in your 401k. Which means sharing some of those contributions. And typically it works out from a tax perspective still, but you'll need to keep that in mind as you consider this for yourself. Now, finally, here's what I promised at the beginning. We're going to do a real example of how this works, okay? This is a cash balance plan run by the actuarial firm that I typically work with. There are 2 notes here first. You'll see that there's a defined contribution plan, which is your 401k. And then you'll see the cash balance pension plan over on the right. For Joe Sample, 45 years old, making $500,000, he can put $31,000 in the 401k plan and an additional $168,000 in the cash balance plan for a total of $199. So that is where this is coming from, right? This is just a proposal where if you wanted to do this on your own, you would need to you might be able to find one online, right? But maybe you just have a TPA or actuarial firm you're familiar with who maybe does your 401k if you have one, right? They could do that. So this is just the one that I use, and this is just kind of validating how much we can put in this plan. Now, having said that, let's look at a before and after example of the taxes. So if we look at this, once again, you'll see 500,000. You'll see the retirement plan contribution of 199 and change. And you'll see that the taxes go down by over $80,000, okay, from 168 to 86, leaving the family with $200,000 left at the end of the day. So as I promised, I want to show you how this is done on my end. So we'll just kind of click into here. We'll pull in example 2 where I've preloaded this example. And you can see that I plugged in the same amount that we were talking about earlier, the 199, 147, into the software as contributed to the plan. Now, the really interesting thing that you'll see here is by doing this, the business gets a QBI deduction back because they fall under the QBI limits again. So not only do you get the retirement plan deduction, you get that QBI deduction back because your income went below 340, which is the cutoff, which is really, really cool. Now you can see the taxes get cut in half from the federal side. The state taxes are about 60% of what they were, 26 to 15. But I just wanted to show you kind of how that works and what it may look like if you kind of tool around with those numbers on your own. So just a quick summary is about $82,000 in tax savings. Like I said, we'd show you how to save $80,000 if you're a business owner. If you make a little bit less than that, the numbers will come down a little. If you make more, might be able to get them a little bit higher. Now, the cool part is that it's $199,000 you put in a retirement plan, which is still your money, right? But you saved $199 at the cost of $117. And what that means is you saved 41 cents in taxes for every dollar you put in the plan. So some pretty cool stuff. Now, the final thing that I want to do is I want to give you a word of caution, kind of a word of counsel, right? And that is that, in my opinion, we talked about that 3 to 5 year commitment, right? These are plans and these are tax strategies where I really think they must line up to your goals. I don't think it makes sense to just do this to save on the taxes and kind of just do it willy-nilly, right? I think it's one where you really need to make sure that you're in this for the long haul and that it aligns with what your goals are. If you just want to pay less in taxes this year, it doesn't make too much sense. So the better way to do this would be to identify your goals, evaluate this as an option, and work towards them. And like I said, how do I do that for my clients? I'll show you. So what I'm about to show you is I'm going to show you my financial planning software. Like I said, this could be something that an advisor uses. It's just the one that I use to kind of do these decisions, along with the tax planning software I showed you a minute ago. This takes a longer view. This is basically a souped up calculator for financial planners. The base facts I have in here is I have Joe and Josephine Sample saving $117,000 per year. Where did that number come from? Well, remember, that's how much the savings minus the tax savings were. So that's how much their cash flow went down. So if they were to save 117, it would be equal to us saving 199 in the cash balance plan. Now, another note is that in this base example, the investment account I have plugged in at a 6.4% return. In the cash balance plan, we have to invest a little bit more conservatively. So I have that at a 5.1% investment return. Now you can see that they're going to be fine, right? If we just don't do anything, they're still going to have, $4.5 million at the end of this plan. But what I want to show you is just the differences, right? How does a cash balance plan work over time? So you can see here, I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to stop the savings that they were already making because you can't, save $1 twice. And then I'm going to turn on the 401k. And most importantly, I'm going to turn on the cash balance plan. This calculator is very simple, right? Green is good. And so if you look at this, the green really, really grows by the time you get to retirement. And by the time Joe and Josephine are retired, they're going to have about $1.6 million than they would have otherwise. But you can see that this kind of decreases over time And that's because even though they have more funds, RMDs start to kick in this retirement plan where, you have to hold it in a retirement plan until 59 and a half. And then at age 72, and actually just change a little bit, it'll have to get forced out and then you pay taxes on it. So there's some things you can do to minimize that. You can do some Roth conversions. You can do some charitable contributions, right? So, but I don't want to get into that today. This just shows that, hey, by the time you're at retirement, you are in a better place for doing this than not. Okay. So that is kind of what I would use to justify and kind of talk about this. Because if Joe and Josephine's plan was to buy a house in 5 years, this doesn't make any sense because they're 50 and they would have that penalty if they needed it. This really makes sense for some large catch-up savings, some large tax savings, and then holding that money in the plan until 59 and a half. So when I talk about putting the plan before the strategy and not putting the cart before the horse, that's what I'm talking about. So the question then becomes, how can I do this myself? Okay? And the first thing you need to do, in my opinion, is identify how much you're looking to contribute and save each year, and then figure out which plan is right for you. That's going to be something where it might just be, hey, do I have that firm, solid cash flow for 3 or 5 years? Maybe I can do this. Maybe it's 200,000 this year and 100 next year. You might want to think about the reasons why and kind of what's coming into that. Because if you're steady and you can contribute a lot, this makes sense. So once you get past that, the second thing you should do is evaluate how much in taxes that amount would save you. Okay, I can save 200. If I save it, it'll save me this much in taxes. Once again, that's where your accountant, your advisor, or maybe some software can come in to help. The third thing you should do is identify a custodian. I use Charles Schwab. That's why I have him on here. Could be anyone, right? Yet you might need to make sure they have actually an account that can hold cash balance funds. Some companies, like, you can't just open a 401k, things like that. You have to open typically what's called a retirement trust at most of the companies. So something to think of there. The fourth, and I say this, I'm the advisor in step 5, right? But the fourth and most important step you need is you do need a TPA or actuary who can run your design, show you that illustration I showed you earlier that shows how much you can save, and then run and support the plan by doing the Department of Labor filings each year. Because you're going to have them value the plan, they send a report in, all this stuff. Okay, so you need to get that person involved. Typically, it's a couple $1,000s a year. Like I said earlier, $2,000 or $3,000 versus, like, I think it's what, $199 we have in this plan. It probably makes sense. Then you need to decide if you'd like an advisor to piggyback and quarterback this situation. That's what I do for my clients. Could be your own advisor, right? But that's one really where I think it's recommended. Obviously, I recommend it because it's what I do. But that one is a little more optional than the others. Now, the sixth thing is that you can do all this, but if you don't start doing it, you don't start saving the money, it doesn't matter, right? You need to put the money in the plan, start saving, and most importantly, make sure your CPA or accountant is aware of it, because if it doesn't show up on your tax return, it doesn't matter. So that's a big one. So finally, let me leave you with one note. I would encourage you to get started, right? You could either research it yourself, you could speak to your advisor to determine if it's right for you, or you could speak to me. The only thing I don't want you to do is let the intimidation factor, the complexity of it potentially stop you, because these are important, high amounts of taxes you can save, right? And the longer you wait, the less time you'll have to get this done. So, and the thing is too, right, is you could research this yourself, talk to your accountant, talk to your advisor, and then be like, yeah, that's not for you, right? And kind of give you a few reasons why. That's perfectly fine. I just want you to get out there, be educated and take the action that's going to get you where you need to be in the future, whether it's this or something else. So I hope that this has helped, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.